to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to another installment of the Left of Lansing podcast. I'm Pat Johnston. And oh, yes, as you can tell, I'm a bit under the weather here. For the first time in 3 years, I caught COVID. Yes, and it has beat me up pretty good. I caught it a couple of weekends ago while at a party, and it got a few of us, including my wife, which is why there was no podcast last week. And I just have to tell you that this COVID ain't a joke. I had body aches, chills, sore throat, massive drainage, coughing, nasal congestion, and massive fatigue. I just could not get out of bed at all, and I begged the bathroom to come to me so I didn't have to get up. Then I slowly started to recover over the weekend, and last Sunday, I really began to feel more like myself. So, of course, I did some wash, mowed the yard, and did various other chores while my wife recovered. And wouldn't you know it, I pushed it too much too early. Because on Tuesday night of this week, I started coming down with what felt like a severe head cold, with sneezing and a constant runny nose, and then the fatigue, cough, and chills all returned. Oh yes, it's glorious. All I wanted to do is remain in bed, and since I tested positive again, my doctor says I have to quarantine for yet another 5 days. Just what I really wanted to hear. I just want to feel human again, really I do. Although I will say this, last week my voice did drop a few octaves, and I sounded really good singing the beginning verse of Prince's Erotic City when he hit those low notes. Remember that part of the song? I really sounded good. I'm sorry I didn't record it for you. So I'm trying my best to fight through it this week and get this podcast posted because you are going to love hearing from my guest in a few minutes. Her name is Kasey Helton, and she is a progressive activist in Livingston County. Kasey's been battling that county's decades upon decades ruby red Republicanism, and we're going to talk about Livingston County politics and how we, as progressives, can turn certain parts of Red County's blue in the long term. So that's all coming up here soon. And I will let you know this too. I sound better in the interview because I recorded that on Monday when I felt like I was becoming human again. Oh, those were the days. So while dealing with COVID during the past week here, I ran into this excellent piece by Michigan Advance's Susan Demas titled "The Persistence of Tragedy, the Preservation of Memory." And Susan wrote, I quote here, "There have been so many things that have haunted me in the last 3 years during a pandemic that has killed millions and debilitated millions more. The gleeful barbarism that marked the Trump era became the lifeblood of the pandemic, and as time and time again, politicians, plutocrats, and assorted self-styled influencers told us not to believe our eyes or the mounting death toll. Things weren't really that bad," they said, and it was those of us who tried to be good neighbors and take basic scientifically tested precautions like wearing masks and getting vaccinated who were the real enemy. Trying to stave off a deadly disease and protect those we love, especially those with the greatest health risks, was cast as an act of stupidity or even unforgivable oppression of those who were quite fine with mass death if it meant less inconvenience in their lives. As the pandemic wore us down, even the most conscientious of us have stopped getting booster vaccines. If you don't want to risk getting your elderly parents sick and you still don't don a KN95 in the grocery store, you can expect dirty looks, even from those who were masking up not that long ago. We're supposed to be at a point in the pandemic where you can make the choices that are right for you, and yet the choice to take any health precautions is often mocked. I'll provide a link to Susan's full article on leftoflansing.com, but those words had me thinking back through the COVID years here and how COVID became the right wing's main new conspiracy theory. It wasn't until Fox News and some others started, pressuring Trump to open everything up again that things really spiraled out of control. Big-time donors in the corporate world feared that Trump would have been blamed for an economy wrecked by COVID. I mean, think about that. Many on the right showed more loyalty to Trump and to the economy than the health and the well-being of their fellow Americans, and more importantly, to their friends and family. I will never really understand it because if you don't have customers, you really can't stay in business. I'm sitting here sick as a dog, but I'm not in the hospital, and it's all because I'm completely updated on my shots. However, on the other side, getting the vaccine or wearing masks was a deep plot of liberalism run amok. I worked with some fine people at my former employer, even though I disagreed politically with some of them. That's okay. We had other things that we could talk about, like sports or whatever. But I'll never forget when one prominent personality on my station walked into the studio and closed the door as I was operating the board. And this is around 2020, just before the election. So I'm wearing a mask, and he looks at me all puzzled. He then tells me how his doctor informed him that masks just don't help. And I said, really? Many of the experts and scientists don't seem to think so. It doesn't help one bit, he responded. He said that according to his doc, masks prevent oxygen from getting to all the vital organs to the body. Now, befuddled that I'm even having this conversation, I said, well, I seem to be breathing just fine. Yes, I'd rather not wear a mask all the time, but for now, why not? But Pat, they don't keep you safe, and they're causing more harm to your body than good. And his voice was really getting stern at that point, to which I responded, so let me get this straight. Are you telling me that surgeons who wear masks during operations which can take sometimes 4, 6, or 8 hours long, sometimes even longer, that those surgeons are essentially killing themselves because they're wearing masks? Now, he looked at me all puzzled because he didn't consider that point, but in true right-wing form, he quickly regained his form and stood with conviction as he answered, yes. I said, well, now that's a paper I can't wait to read from your doctor because he just turned years and years of scientific research on its head. Looking back, I'm not surprised that the death toll reached the level that it did in this country. Why? Because it's all about owning the libs to the right wing. That's what gives them happiness. As the Atlantic's Adam Sewer wrote a few years ago about today's Trumpian Republican dogma, the cruelty is the point. Sewer wrote, their cruelty made them feel good, it made them feel proud, it made them feel happy, and it made them feel closer to one another. See, they didn't care about getting people sick or helping lead people to their deaths. They didn't care one bit. They only cared about liberal tears. It's why even after the horrific shootings at Oxford High School and MSU, that the Michigan Republican Party's answer to those tragedies and the numerous other gun violence tragedies in both Michigan and the rest of the country is to make it easier for people to carry concealed guns without needing a permit. That was their solution to the Michigan Democratic Legislature's moves to expand gun background checks, safe storage laws, preventing kids from getting a hold of their parents' guns, and extreme risk protection orders to take guns out of the hands of those deemed a risk to themselves and to others. That's the way the Republican Party here in the state decided to go. The other brilliant solution Republicans had were providing extra money for trauma kits at schools. Democratic State Senator Dana Polhanke of Livonia spoke on the Senate floor in response to the Republicans' best ideas to counter rampant gun violence.
Mr. President, I find it galling that the senator from the 23rd District is talking about the recent spate of kids bringing guns to school. In Grand Rapids, I believe 4 kids have brought guns to school because they were not properly secured by their parents. And what are we gonna do about that? He has no solutions except to vote for an amendment that would budget new money for trauma kits. That's their solution. Last week, this same body introduced a bill to make Michigan a constitutional carry state, a permitless carry state, like the Wild Wild West. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats, in our first 100 days, passed child safe storage acts into law. And because they weren't given immediate effect by my colleagues from across the aisle, they won't take effect immediately. Meanwhile, we have kids, 3rd graders, bringing guns to school in our state. How dare you get up and talk about trauma kits as a solution?
You see, cruelty is the point for the right wing. That's why Kasey Helton will talk about the right-wing Livingston County Board of Commissioners' ludicrous vote declaring the county a constitutional county in which they won't have to follow state laws or guns or whatever else. Must be nice. And the county sheriff there, Mike Murphy, declared that he will not enforce red flag laws.
Let me just say this in closing here. In 2020, there was 45,272 deaths by gun, United States. 51% of those were by suicide. Now, I didn't delve deeper to see how many were justifiable shootings, but let's just assume that half of that number is a good number. So, 23,000, give or take. In 2020, there were 11,674 killed in drunk driving crashes. So why aren't we taking drunks' cars? They should never be able to drive again because they kill a bunch of people too. In 2021, there was 106,000 overdoses. 106,000 overdoses. Why don't we make laws that make it illegal to have drugs, especially hard drugs? Oh, wait, we do. Here's the point. We have never, ever been able to legislate our way out of a crisis. That's not how it works. You can make all the laws in the world and people are still going to do evil things. People are still going to do bad things.
Wow, that really is some groundbreaking, brilliant commentary there. Why have laws at all? People will just break those laws. We have drunk driving laws, but people still drive drunk. So, hey, let's just abolish those laws. Come on, Mike, are you with me? People run stop signs. Let's get rid of those too, Mike. Oh, Mike sure doesn't mind attacking those on the First Amendment, though. Oh, yes. Now, he loves his Second Amendment, but the First Amendment, he's a little shaky on that one. So Kasey Helton made the news a few years ago when she tweeted out information from a public meeting focusing on COVID. She tweeted the names of 2 nurses who spoke out against masks, and Sheriff Murphy abused his power by trying to have Kasey arrested for posting details about a public meeting. Now, the county prosecutor did not press charges because he'd be the laughingstock of the state, of course. But it's strange that a man of Sheriff Murphy's stature, who believes wholeheartedly in the U.S. Constitution, it's just amazing that he showed so little regard for the First Amendment of the Constitution. However, he refuses to do anything to protect his citizens from gun violence because cruelty is the point. Kasey Helton will join me here in a moment. You're listening to LOL,
a podcast devoted to intelligence, sanity, and freedom, or otherwise known as progressive politics. It's Left of Lansing with your host, Pat Johnston. Need to tell Pat where he's wrong? Or do you actually want to praise Pat? leftoflansing@gmail.com is how to reach him. Here's Pat.
Hey, let me remind you that every Friday I post what I call a Left of Lansing short, and that's where I pontificate and prognosticate on a specific story or issue that I wasn't exactly able to expound here upon the weekly podcast. This Left of Lansing short is only available on my blog. That's leftoflansing.com. That's simple. Joining me now is someone that I've been looking forward to talking with here for quite some time. She made news back in 2021 when she attended a Board of Education meeting and took issue when a couple of nurses claimed that masks were useless to help prevent COVID. She posted the 2 nurses' names and tagged their employers, which fired up Livingston County Sheriff Mike Murphy, who recommended charging her with cyber stalking. Those charges never came to fruition, of course, but it's just one example of life in Livingston County for someone trying to preserve common sense in such a red county. Her name is Kasey Helton, and she's a guest here on this week's Left of Lansing podcast. Thank you so very much for being on this week, Kasey. I appreciate it.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for having me. Glad you're feeling better.
Thanks. I wanted to have you on here this week so you could give your perspective on being a progressive activist living in one of the most red Republican counties in the state of Michigan. And I'm talking about Livingston County. First of all, have you lived in Livingston County for your whole life?
Well, my family moved out here in 1986 from Detroit. So for quite some time, yes, I graduated from Howell High School in 1995. And I actually worked here in Livingston County for about 5 years as a journalist for the Livingston Daily Press and Argus, which is now the Livingston Daily. It was bought out by Gannett, but it was an award-winning, locally owned daily newspaper that unfortunately was bought out by a larger corporation. That's a whole other topic there. But yeah, I moved away for a while to Ypsilanti, and I lived out there for about a decade. And then I kind of boomeranged back here around 2009, right around the time that the Tea Party started gaining popularity out here in Livingston County, which I really think was kind of the starter point for a shift in politics here in the county toward something more right-wing, more extreme, and it's kind of been progressing rightward ever since then.
Were you surprised that the Tea Party and that movement back a decade ago, it made such a strong impression there, I guess, in the county?
You know, I knew that the Tea Party was gaining ground, and it didn't come as a complete shock, but it was alarming because I had lived in liberal Ann Arbor for 10 years, and I would come back to visit my family every now and then, but I wasn't really too updated on what was going on politically out here. But when I finally moved back out here, I actually attended a couple Tea Party events back then, just because I was so curious about what they were saying. They were very riled up about Obamacare back then. And because I had grown up in the church out here, I went to these meetings. One of them was at the middle school campus in Howell in the cafeteria, and the cafeteria was packed. I knew people there. I knew people like dads who I had known from when I was little, you know, that were still around, and they saw me and they would say, you know, hey, Kasey, how's it going? And I just kind of like was very friendly with them, but I was more of an observer because I wanted to see what was really driving this. What bothered me most about it was that it was really being fueled by a lot of, once again, misinformation. You remember the Obama death panel rumor that everybody thought was going to happen? Those kind of things. It never came about, but there was so much panic and hysteria around it. What I couldn't figure out is, because I was uninsured at the time that I was out, I had no health insurance. I couldn't figure out why so many people would be against my ability to access affordable healthcare at a time when I really needed it. It just made no sense. So yeah, it was pretty alarming.
But like you said, that's where the whole misinformation was really, really beginning, and it took hold in a major part of this country and pockets here in our state of Michigan, especially, like you said, in Livingston County. Now, I live in a red county as well up here in Gratiot, and I know that was the same there. I worked in right-wing talk radio during that time, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and it sometimes would just really be alarming how such misinformation could just be shared and be accepted, you know, as much as it was. Also by people, like you said, you knew some of the people. And I think would make me even more depressed, I guess.
Yeah, it did. And it was hard because some of these people were families that had kids my age, and we all grew up together. And it was difficult to see like this political ideology take root. And at the time, I wanted to learn more about, you know, like I said, I took more of an observer tactic toward a lot of this because I just wanted to figure it out. That was a long time ago. A lot of my tactics and my activism has changed a lot over the years, but I feel like at that time gave me a good understanding of really what the thought processes were for people who were succumbing to this misinformation.
Just so those who are listening to us right now, Livingston County consists of, well, I guess you could say it's west of Oakland County, north of Washtenaw County, south of Genesee and Shiawassee counties, and east of Ingham County?
Pretty much smack dab in the middle there, yeah.
Which is why I understand why that county is so alluring for a lot of people who would like to live there, because on a location basis, I mean, like you said, you're not that far, let's say, from Ann Arbor or Detroit or Lansing. So if you want to have a home where the commute to those cities wouldn't be a long drive, I can see why Livingston County would be very alluring.
Yeah, that's exactly what brought my father out to Howell. We grew up in Detroit. My dad was working for a corporation, like an ad agency out in Southfield, but they wanted their kids to kind of have a rural upbringing, you know. The schools were better out here. There was obviously some of the Wayne County schools in Detroit were not the best funded schools. So they wanted us to have good schools. And that's how we ended up out here.
Talking with Kasey Helton here on the Left of Lansing podcast this week. Now, Livingston County always tends to vote reliably Republican. And in fact, in a story that I found in the Livingston Post a few days after the 2020 election, Donald Trump won 106 of the county's 108 precincts, then taking just over 60% of the total vote. Now, as for Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer, she won 43% of the vote in the county in 2022, which is slightly better than her 2018 showing. Still, the 2 Republican state House seats went heavily Republican, as did the state Senate race, which state Senator, why am I drawing a name on blank on her name? Lana
Theis.
Yeah, Lana Theis. Yeah, how could I forget that name? She won quite handily. So, Kasey, this has been the way it's been here in Livingston County for a long, long time. Do you see this trend changing even in the slightest in the near term? And if so, where in the county do you see things maybe turning a bit more purple in certain areas of the county?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, Pat, because like I said, I've been following this issue closely because local politics, they fascinate me. I kind of am hyper fixated on them, just maybe because it is my hometown, but I have seen a definite difference from 2009 up to 2023. One thing that I haven't talked about, but I've run for county commission 3 times in Livingston County.
Good. That's good, though.
Yeah, no, it is. I ran in 2018, I ran in 2020, and then I ran again in 2022. One of the reasons why I ran was I knew that the odds of me winning were extremely remote. I would have loved to have won, but having been a reporter out here, I know how county politics, these down ballot races go, and they always swing Republican. And it's still a problem that we have, and we can talk more about that. But basically, when I started running, Democrats had a hard time even filling the county commission ballot in Livingston County. It was like squeezing blood from a turnip to get people to even run. Now, for several election cycles, we've managed to be able to fill the ticket completely. And I give the county Democrats, Livingston County Democrats, all the credit for their efforts in doing that. There's just so much more growing interest in local elections here. People are paying attention to what the county commission is doing now. And really, the reason why that is, I put that on the county commission themselves, because we have a county commission that has neglected real needs and real issues here in this county. Things like roads, things like public health, like mental health care here, things like parks. They've abandoned their interest in those things, in making our community a better place just on a local government level and just having normal government business, so the point where you don't even really have to think about it. They have really abandoned that in pursuit of culture wars. They want to take this county and turn the culture wars into a local level. And people have been paying attention to that, whether they agree or disagree. And the people who do disagree very strongly. They disagree on things like abortion. One thing, I don't want to get too far out in the weeds with you, but I'll tell you one example here. Back in, I think it was 2018, if I remember correctly, the county, this is where things kind of started to get really off the rails with the county commission here. They passed a resolution unanimously, the county commission, to deny abortion care coverage for non-bargained employees of the county.
Really?
Even in the case of rape and incest. So if you are a non-bargain for employee, hardworking employee for Livingston County, and you needed access to abortion care, and you were raped, or you were a victim of incest, or the health of the mother, they would not cover you under the county healthcare plan. So just in the news recently, we have this 2A resolution that was passed unanimously by the county, where we live in a state where 75% of people, I think is the figure, who want some sort of reasonable gun safety legislation. And yet the county commission voted unanimously to make this county the first ever 2A constitutional county, or whatever nonsense they're talking about. And then Sheriff Murphy is here saying he's not going to enforce red flag laws. And that was all over the news.
This is just on my mind right now, so I just want to ask before I forget it. You were talking about how there has been a lot more interest in local politics, especially those on more of the Democratic side, you'd say, in certain parts parts of the county. Do you think there's more that the state Democratic Party could be doing in helping get a message out more to Livingston County and to other red counties and rural counties throughout the state of Michigan?
I do think that there is more that can be done. And I want to say something about myself and my husband really quickly so that they know. I'm a college dropout, okay? So my husband is a vet. He never went to college. So we are these non-college educated blue collar voters. My husband works for a steel company in South Line. He's a steel worker. He's a union steel worker. Okay.
Yep.
We own our home here in Livingston County. We own over 2-acre property. We are responsible citizens. And we are the kind of people that Democrats on the state level, I would love to see more reaching out because it is possible. My husband and I were both Democrats. We know the issues for us that make us Democrats. And I think there is an argument to be made for more state involvement here. I think one thing that would really benefit Livingston County progressive causes out here is, I don't want to step on any toes in saying this, but like we could use a little bit more rebranding of the local Livingston County Democrat organization. And I guess maybe rebranding isn't the right word, but one thing that really does concern me is that we have a whole lot of really hardworking Democrats in Livingston County. Judy Daubenmeier does a great job. She's the county chair. But one thing that concerns me is a lot of these people who are really doing the work in Livingston County Dems are getting older. This is an organization where the same people have run it for like a very long time. And I sometimes worry that there's not enough outreach of that 25 to 45 demographic out here.
Like Generation Z and millennials.
Yes, I feel like we could be doing more to engage them. That's where I see a lot of the energy here in Livingston County is among those families, those young families that are upset about Dobbs. They're worried that their daughters are not going to have their medical privacy protected, that they're not going to have access to abortion care if they need it. Guns are another issue that are a huge concern to these families. They worry that their children are not going to be safe in school because, we have a sheriff here that doesn't even want to enforce the law when it comes to red flag laws. These are real concerns that affect these parents on a daily basis. And there's a lot of energy there that I see that could be tapped deeper and to get more involvement. And maybe some of that would have to do with outreach and rebranding to get that involvement. And if the state can do that, that would be wonderful if they could help with that.
Especially younger voters, because it seems like, as we saw in Michigan in 2022 in the midterms, the young voters are not particularly happy with the Republican side of things when it comes to abortion, when it comes to guns, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to working conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like the state Democratic Party should really be doing a lot more work to ensure that they could get those people to vote for them everywhere around the state.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I would love to see that happen. I'm not really close to state party politics. I don't know how all that works. I really don't. But all I do know is that I talk to a lot of people. I've been involved in organizations like Indivisible. And then recently there's been a nonpartisan PAC that has started up here in Livingston County called Livingston Integrity. That is a kind of a sister organization to Ottawa Integrity that you may be aware came out of the county commission race out there on the west side of the state. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing is that there's a lot of energy in these groups that are not necessarily affiliated directly with the Democratic Party, but they're kind of like groups that support what they support.
Not to interrupt you, Kasey, but I think you're hitting on a big point there, is that there are other avenues that people can take if they don't really have, let's say, a great Democratic Party organization in their county or in their town or whatever, that there are other ways you can do that by setting up your own groups and your own progressive organizations to push your point of view, I guess. And that's kind of what you are doing in Livingston.
I didn't have anything to do with the setup of the Livingston Integrity PAC, but I'm just more like assisting them. I'm not on the board or anything, but I am just kind of helping to promote them when I can. I do know the president of the group, Julie Ohashi. I know her. She's a friend of mine. She started that PAC on her own, and it's actually really easy to do. It's easy to start a PAC nowadays. It doesn't take a whole lot to do. Absolutely. That's something that anyone can do anywhere.
Well, and that's what happened with groups like the Indivisible groups. They started out first kind of like statewide organizations in a way, and then they became offshoots sprouting up in various counties across the country.
Yeah, that's actually how I started meeting a lot of progressives in Livingston County was my involvement in Indivisible. We would go and picket Mike Bishop's right office.
Nice.
We would do that every chance we got. And because he was like no show Mike. Remember he had we had a cardboard cutout of him and we would bring it everywhere because he never showed up anywhere. And that was really how I started making these connections, going from like an observer to an actual participant. And I really super appreciative of Indivisible for allowing me to get to know them.
We're speaking with Kasey Helton here on the Left of Lansing podcast. All right. So during this past month here on the pod, Kasey, I've spent some time talking about your favorite county sheriff, Mike Murphy, as you've already mentioned a few times, because he's decided to make a name for himself in a number of ways. But one in particular, as you've already mentioned, is that he's decided that he will not enforce any of the gun legislation passed by state Democrats. He especially says he will not back the extreme risk protection order or the red flag laws, which he says those laws are unconstitutional. And he made that grand announcement, I think on Facebook, right? Last month. And
yeah, it was a Facebook Live.
And you tweeted this. You said, and it was tongue in cheek, but you were right. You said, laws are pointless, so why even have them is a hell of a take for a sheriff. I'll say that. So I guess having a sheriff to enforce those pointless laws is now also pointless. No? Now, you made that point because the point of being a sheriff, I always thought was to enforce laws passed by the state, or so I thought.
Oh, yes. I was making a joke. Yeah. I mean, it's tongue in cheek for sure. But it did strike me as absolutely ridiculous that a sheriff doesn't understand his own lane, when it comes to like the legal process and why we have laws and the fact that he is the sheriff. He is not the judge. That is not his role. I've said before, I'm very curious to see what happens when a judge actually does issue an order under the umbrella of the red flag legislation. Is Murphy going to put his money where his mouth is and defy a judge's order? I kind of have a hard time believing that, but I could be wrong. But part of me feels like a lot of this is grandstanding. He is a politician at his core. That's exactly what a sheriff is. More than anything, they're elected and they have to please their base. And unfortunately, as we've seen here in Livingston County with the recent turnover of the Livingston GOP from Megan Reckling's former party of more mainline Republicans, perhaps, to this new brand under Jennifer Smith, who is the new chair of the Livingston GOP, things have just become increasingly radical. They govern like they're in an internet silo, but that's not the reality. You have to be able to build consensus among your community, really to govern in good faith and to be truly successful and a politician of the people. So I think that Murphy, his actions are really just maybe throwing meat to them. I don't know, but we'll see. I hope that's what it is, because I'll tell you what, if something happens out here in Livingston County where we have a shooting or we have a domestic violence incident where things get out of hand and a woman or a child is killed in a domestic incident or a school shooting, God forbid any of these things, and Murphy had a chance to go in there and obey the law and to fulfill his role as sheriff, and he doesn't do that and something happens, I don't even want to think about that. You know what I mean? But that would be on him. Does he really want that on his conscience? I don't think anybody would.
You also brought up the whole, was that the Board of Commission passing that resolution saying that Livingston County is a constitutional county. And I guess that means in their mind, they get to ignore laws they don't like, I guess. And you tweeted another thing that I brought this up on the podcast last week when I was talking with State Democratic Representative Kelly Breen. And you tweeted that nothing will change here until there's a bigger push to vote local. You put your finger on maybe what's, I think, hampered the progressive movement a lot, or just the common sense movement towards sanity, because the right, I think, does a far more effective job at organizing than our side does for a long time. And I think you've seen that. Now, you've said that things are starting to change a bit, but do you think that I'm pretty much right on that point?
No, I 100% think you're right on that point. I think for a long time, there was a problem with the national Democrats weren't paying enough attention to state races. Now we're seeing more of a focus on state races from the Democratic Party, especially here in Michigan. They've done an amazing job. Amazing. But there's still work that needs to be done to bring the successes that we're enjoying higher up the ballot. those successes need to trickle down to down ballot races. And it just hasn't been happening, not here anyway. I can't speak for other counties, but there's a 30 to 40% ceiling that keeps getting hit on local elections. Now, speaking specifically of the county commission races.
Yeah.
So we had, in 2018, we had one candidate break the 40% mark out in Hamburg Township. I can't remember how many there were in 2020, but in 2022, we did have 3 separate county commission candidates that broke the 40% mark, which for us is good. For here in Livingston County, that's good. It needs to be better. Obviously, it's got to be above 50%, but that is progress. If I were running the party, and I've never done that. I don't claim any expertise, but it seems to me that there needs to be more of a targeted focus on those specific county commission districts that are making gains, specifically like in Hamburg Township area, city of Brighton for sure. Because like you said, the city of Brighton went for Governor Whitmer, and for Alyssa Slotkin, as did the city of Howell in 2022. So unfortunately, another big problem is that our county is gerrymandered in the way that they draw districts. There are Democratic enclaves here in the county, and we know what they are. But whenever the Board of Canvassers gets together every few years to draw the county commission maps, they always try in a way to dilute that support in those areas.
Kasey, we could talk for an hour, 2 hours. I'm so sorry that we're about to run out of time, but I just want to thank you so very much for being on the pod here this week. And thank you for all the hard work that you're doing to stand up for your beliefs, which clearly are the value and beliefs that'll help our country and our state become a better place. I've always said this, that it always starts local. And I'm so glad that there are people like you on the front lines for us. So please come back sometime here in the near future so we can talk a lot more. I really appreciate that.
I'd love to talk more, Pat, whenever you'll have me. It was such a pleasure. And thank you so much for helping to spread the word about what's going on here in Livingston County. I really appreciate you.
It's progressivism with passion. It's the Left of Lansing podcast, where Pat shines a light on Michigan's progressive movement. Contact Pat at leftoflansing@gmail.com.
That was a really good talk there with Kasey Helton, and we didn't really get to talk more of the many battles that she's been a part of and winning there in Livingston County. You can follow Kasey Helton on Twitter, and I will tag her on Twitter when I share this week's podcast, or just visit leftoflansing.com, and I will link to her Twitter from there as well. She shares so much valuable information on the right wing in Livingston County, and I retweet and like just about everything that she posts there, so please follow Kasey when you can. Oh, and I will also provide a link to Livingston Integrity on the blog, featuring this week's episode. I always add some notes along with the pod on leftoflansing.com. Now, Kasey stressed the importance of paying attention to what's happening in your own backyard, because that's where the right wing is out-muscling the progressive movement. And she's right when she says that Democrats have done a better job in the last few election cycles in paying more attention and spending more resources on state politics. I've talked about that a lot here on the pod. Let's face it, Democrats got slaughtered at the polls in state legislature races across the country during the Obama years. And as we have learned, that's exactly where right-wing Republicans really flex their muscles through gerrymandering, making it extremely difficult for Democrats to fight back against Republican extremism. Now, that has changed in some places, especially right here in Michigan, thanks to the progressive activism in ending Republican gerrymandering. But while Democrats have enjoyed some success here on the state level, the right wing didn't just suddenly scurry away into a hole. No, they're fighting harder, even more so, and they're doing it on a more local level, like on county commissions, city commissions, and education boards. And that's what I would like to accentuate here on this week's Last Call on LOL. Now, I wasn't able to cover this with Kasey here this week, but progressives, or again, those who just want simple common sense, since progressivism is common sense, won a battle that really should have never been a battle in the first place. Now, it's no secret that the Michigan Republican Party jumped aboard this right-wing battle cry of protecting our kids from being woke or indoctrinated or whatever in public schools. Now, what they're really saying, and you know this to be true, is that they don't like American history being taught in our schools. And one of those fights happened in Livingston County's Heartland Township. Now, Kasey tweeted all about this. There was this millage renewal vote, not for a new millage, just a renewal so that the school district there would have money to pay for resources, to kind of keep the buildings up and running. And the right wing there fought against it. Why? Because of books. The Republican chair of Livingston County is named Jennifer Smith. She's a piece of work, and she led a fight opposing this millage. Oh, and by the way, she's also head of the anti-educational and nutty Moms for Liberty chapter in that county. Now, these are moms who are for so-called liberty by banning books. Now, I know. I try not to understand their way of thinking either, but that's liberty, apparently. And I wish that maybe they could spot the problem here. See, if they actually did take the time to read books, to read history books, world history books, to read books that maybe don't exactly agree with their point of view, maybe then they'd realize how banning books, is kind of anti-liberty or anti-American. Anyway, I guess that's probably not going to happen for the time being. But this Jennifer Smith said that the Livingston County Republicans opposed that millage renewal, again, designed to raise money for vital resources for schools because they didn't like that slavery or civil rights or the country's horrendous treatment of Native Americans or gay rights or that the Holocaust might be covered in American history classes. And that's where we are right now. I wish that these incurious right-wingers understood that the American family is not unlike any other family. Families go through trials and tribulations, but we learn from them, we gain experience from them to become a better and stronger family in the long run. Families are much like this country, striving to become a more perfect union. Hey, that was pretty good. Anyway, that millage passed in blowout fashion, and sanity did prevail for a change. But for every win, there is a setback. As activist Joe Spalding shared on Twitter this week, Hudsonville Public Schools, right outside Grand Rapids, held a hearing on banning the book Jarhead by Anthony Swafford. Now, the Board of Ed there voted 4-3 to ban the book from its library because I guess it's not pro-military enough. It's written by a Gulf War vet who just wanted to give his readers a true, unsanitized viewpoint of being a Marine in wartime. But because it's not a John Wayne-like story, the right-wingers in Hudsonville banned it. Oh, but don't call that indoctrination. No. And they are on the rampage in local school boards all across the state and all across the country because if there's something that makes these parents just a little squeamish, such as kids learning about Jim Crow, or how some kids might have two moms or two dads, or how kids will be taught how climate change is ruining the planet, the right wing wants to ban truth. Again, that's what indoctrination is all about. And the right wing is attacking American values right in your backyard. And we better wake up because, as Joe Spalding just alerted all of us on Twitter, that's about to happen next week in Ottawa County. The right-wing county commission there is trying to follow in Livingston County's footsteps by declaring itself a constitutional county, which again means it will refuse to follow gun laws passed by the state and whatever other laws it doesn't want to follow. See, that's fascism right in your backyard, Michigan. Christianist nationalism is taking the place where the only point of view worth pushing is the white-wing point of view. Young people have become galvanized to vote in high numbers here in Michigan, just as they did in the past midterms. But I have to tell you, it takes more than just statewide races to really change things. I'm reminded of an episode of MASH, yes, I am a Gen Xer, so stick with me, where Hawkeye and BJ stop a pilot who is buying all kinds of merchandise from young South Korean kids who themselves are risking their lives just to make a little money from this pilot. Realizing that Hawkeye and BJ have defeated him in the end and they got him to stop, he says to them, okay, fine, they stopped him, but others are doing the exact same thing. What are you going to do, change the world? And BJ snaps back and says, no, just our little corner of it. Change happens faster on the local level. I've always said that, and it's time for all of us to wake up to that fact. The right wing knows it. We better learn it soon.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wander Beats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
I just realized that the pilot I described in that MASH episode is very Republican. He was all about exploiting child labor for his own personal gain, right? Hey, that'll do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. I am going to have some Gatorade and just take it easy here this weekend as I will try to finally get over this COVID. Like I said, it's no joke, so please protect yourself. And please, if you happen to get it, just take it easy. I'm learning the hard way. Coming up next week, I'll speak with business and econ writer Rick Hagelin from Michigan Advance as we'll cover budget battles and how Michigan can best bring younger people here and how we can stop our young people from leaving. That's all happening next week. Thanks again to Kasey Helton for being on this week and for standing up for progressivism and sanity in Livingston County. She's fighting along with others, and that's how it starts. If we can all join forces and fight back all across the state, then we can truly turn Michigan for the better. Remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.